Hi everyone, I'm Ben Marshan and I'm joined by Angus Woods. How you going, Angus?
Good mate, good to be having a chat with you live in front of people. Usually this is just a room and you're transcribing and basically having just a general chit chat about what's going
Yeah.
on.
So I've been writing articles for Advisor Ratings for 2 or 3 months now, and we'll be doing so more next year. But often Angus and I will just have a chat about what's going on, and that'll become the basis of an article. So I thought, why not do this live so people can ask us questions as we're going along and see what's going on. So we'll talk a bit about 2024 and what's happened. We'll talk about what we're expecting for 2025. But there's been a bit of news around recently around private equity and people being bought and people being sold. Obviously, with the AMP, AZ, NGA deal. And then we've had announcements around Insignia this week.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on all
Um,
that, Angus?
yep. Just confirming. We're live, Ben. Before we
Yes.
go, we are live. Okay, you've got confirmation. We were talking to basically thin air there for a while, but I think no, from our perspective, well, from I think the market's perspective, I carried a few phone calls over the weekend. I had a few phone calls over the weekend, and especially this morning. I think the Bain deal is really exciting for the industry in terms of a vote of confidence. And I know everybody says that, but off the back of Oaktree, off the back of Bain investing, I think a sizable sum in November into the UK market, its first foray into advice and mortgages. This isn't something that they've sort of taken lightly. And I'm sure there's been some backroom, basically discussions that have been, looking at this market for quite some time. I know, I speak to equity analysts quite often across Citi, Bank of America, Barrenjoey, la-di-da-di-da, about this space. And generally, in a very attractive space for the overseas contingents, especially, we've got KKR in here. I know part of I think part of the CFS transaction has worked, part of it hasn't, and so working through that. But I think it's really just the wave of what's going to happen over the next 5 years. So if I'm an advisor or if I'm a platform in this space, I'd be bloody excited to be in here. With the Insignia deal, I think my view on that is it will, obviously I do think it will go ahead. It's an all cash deal. Obviously there'll be some more bidding to play out. All good. And I think from that perspective, what we're going to start to see is now a ruckus go on in the background in terms of what does Insignia look like in terms of a play with potentially other platforms, and what's Bain going to do in terms of complementing that. If you have a look at Insignia's financials, now I nerded out over the weekend and did have a look at Insignia's financials, and obviously there's a bit of transfer pricing there as the business is structured and cleaned up. You've got 20% margin on the advice business, and you've got some considerable margin on the other sides of the business, being the platform, the asset management side, or the wrap or the super side. Now with the wrap business, and the platform business, we had the MLC transition earlier on in the year. With all of these transitions, it can really sort of play both a negative and a positive role. They had some outflows up until that, but a lot of the MLC sort of navigator wrap advisors who migrated onto Expand actually have felt far more positive than you would normally see in a transition where they're used to the same sort of UI, UX and those areas. So in our latest results, which are only just sort of feeding through at the moment in terms of our landscape report, I've had a look through about 140 or 150 qualitative comments. Yes, you're going to get some negative comments from, mostly, advisors who aren't as technologically savvy, who are used to the old way of doing things. But you have a look at some of the advisors who have been migrated onto Expand, and they're hugely positive around the experience for themselves and their clients. So I think that's a plus. If I'm Insignia, I've got a I've got to basically something up my sleeve to actually showcase to Bain. That's one of those areas. The actual Net Promoter Score is actually quite strong for Expand at the moment. And what that means for someone like Bain is great flows. Hopefully, will be retained. But also you're creating a platform that now is just as competitive than the challenger brands as well. Obviously, the Expand brand has got a significant amount of flows on it, but if you can start to showcase that we're just as competitive as Hub and Netwealth, it really becomes attractive. The other area on that note, without actually understanding the conversations that are going on, a lot of the MLC IWF advisors do have an older client base who are nearing retirement, who do have an attraction to certain industry funds, and given that they've got their own asset management vehicle. So if I'm sitting there and thinking I'm going to be able to transition, my advisors are going to be more likely to transition into a platform and or an asset management arm of my business, as opposed to, say, someone else. I think from Insignia's point of view, it adds a far significant element of premium to the price that they would get in sort of 3 to 4 years' time as the industry funds start to continue to lose flows. So I think overall, it's a great transaction for. I think it's a great transaction for long-suffering Insignia shareholders. The price will go up as to whether, like all these things, as to whether it will go through or not is another matter. But I'm fairly certain, obviously, Bain have made a play. They've made a play in the UK, so they've got some more up their sleeve here.
Yeah. And that's obviously the breaking news side of thing. We also, as I said before, we also saw the AZNGA AMP entirety deal that went through earlier in the year. Is this something that you think we're going to see more of, and what are the broader effects going to be on the industry more broadly?
In short, yes, I'm a bit naive sometimes, Ben. I get called into analyst meetings and then have to present the case for the advice industry and what's going on and la-di-da-di-da, and then all of a sudden you'll see some sort of bid for an organisation or someone come into the market that you realise, oh, okay, they've been picking my brain to understand what's going on at the coalface. I had the same with Bailador at the time. So I've got a few people that can't actually get in at the moment, so I'm not sure what's going on, but there's a bunch of text messages that are coming through.
Yeah, we've got people in and listening, so I'm not sure what's going on there.
Oh, so I don't know what they're using. But in terms of, so we had Bailador obviously talking about, the platform space, and then, a month or two later, they obviously threw a $20 million check to Dash's way. So with if the conversations I'm having in the market are an indicator of 2025 M&A activity, then it's going to be pretty strong. Obviously, I'm not, always in on what's going on in the market, but so this will play out more and more in terms of, a positive sort of interface for at least practice owners. But also in that space, but also just technology providers. I think there's going to be some interesting activity going on there, especially in that software space around Iris and what's going on with the whole Xplan tools. We're seeing more and more and we can get into this, right? With the more and more sort of, with the commoditisation of technology, AI, we're experimenting with that. I think the reduction in technology and efficiencies that are going to play out is really interesting, and that's where obviously someone like an Expand and Bain, no doubt are seeing that with something like some of the technology efficiencies that they're likely to see, but also some of the software providers and the margins that some of these practices will start to get. So that's what you're going to get two margin plays here. You're going to get the continual sort of separately managed account margin play. And then you're going to get the technology efficiency margin play, which will make practices and advisors sort of very excited for the next 3 years as they start to think about what does that mean for their profitability.
Yeah. And do you think on that side that these are technology plays or asset plays, or I mean, where's the benefit in platforms these days?
Well, I think, it's a combination of it. The benefit for platforms at the moment is obviously you're going to the transfer out of funds. So we are seeing we're seeing that already. So transfer out of funds into basically there's 3 areas that the funds are coming from, and the reason we know this is because of the 6,500 advisors. Thank you to all of you who have signed up, but they're using Product Direct. But we're seeing it into 3 buckets. And the substantial flow out of industry funds either into retail funds. Retail funds are at an advantage because they've already got sort of advisor portals. They've got an advisor interface. They know how to handle that retail space a lot better. They've been in the advice game for quite some time. And then you've got the SMSF space, and I think I made mention of it previously. I think in the last 2 years, the growth of SMSFs has actually gone up. I think it was about 25% from the previous sort of 5 or 6 years. SMSFs were a little bit on the nose one stage with APRA and the rules and the limits around what makes up an SMSF. And then you're also seeing a slowdown in the number of actual sort of SMSFs being wound up. So from that perspective, that's exciting for those in the SMSF administration space for looking for technology solutions. And then finally, the other bit, obviously, the other area that's benefiting is platforms. So advisors looking to put, funds, either into retail or super products, their super sort of side of their platforms into into platforms. So I'm getting a bunch of texts from people that can't log in. So obviously, there's some people that can, some people that can't. They can look at the recording afterwards. So that's where there's those 3 buckets. For platform providers especially, there's, how would I say this? There's a bunch of funds coming through the door. The concern around platforms is mostly due to, I think, fee reductions. I think fees are going to come under slight constraints in terms of, where's the growth come from. So the growth from, say, the transfer of the wealth to their platforms needs to be outweighed by, I think, the competitive landscape in fees. So fees will continue to decline there. So it will become a quant in terms of quant. I mean volumes of cash and volumes of money coming into their platforms, and then it's the type of products that are obviously going to be invested in. If we stay in a high yield environment and with money sitting in cash and TDs, that's not ideal for platforms who don't compete in that space at the moment, notwithstanding the fact that I know certain platforms are looking at the cash and TD space. The other 2025 prediction, well, I don't know if we're doing predictions yet, Ben, but the 25 prediction I will start to play out is the technology play that the platforms will start to have with super funds themselves. So there are a bunch of super funds that are just not technology efficient, let's be honest. And they don't know how to actually work with advisors in that respect. They don't have the advisor portals. Some of the current incumbents are basically trying to build off legacy technology and legacy interfaces, and really it's sort of needing to understand what does that look like from an efficiency perspective. Even the current technology platforms are wedded to legacy technology. And having spoken with a lot of the platform sort of CEOs, I think that's the challenge with AI, and we can talk about AI, like where does CRMs exist, not just for platforms, but where does AI exist in the whole CRM space? You've got Salesforce, you've got Dynamics and all those sorts of things. You're now starting to see those plays being disrupted. Like we live in HubSpot for our CRM, and again, it's a simple CRM just to really sort of basically talk with advisors and talk with our vendors, but they've now implemented a data sharing arrangement where, you basically share your data with the entire HubSpot community. And Salesforce are aware of this, like where is it that we're going? Because the commoditization of these CRMs is going to become more and more pronounced over the next 2 to 3 years. So they're starting to see, how do we play the data game? That's going to play out, not in the near term, because financial services, well, the wealth space, I'm not talking about all the financial services, they're laggards in this respect. And I think there was a session that Michael Collo said on LinkedIn, which I can share with you, but who's obviously in the AI space. But, in terms of the large financial services companies, is actually how to actually find the use cases within their own organisations, but how do you actually change people's behaviour at the moment, and we're not quite there, even at the senior executive level and at the board level. People are saying we need to embed AI, we need to do X, Y, Z. And it's almost getting there to the point of, so the industry will be slow, but someone new and someone interesting and someone like an OpenAI will come out and sort of out of nowhere, out of the blue, and say, we can now do this, right? And make it really UX, UI friendly.
I think that's
where going to be really interesting to see. I reckon that's the 25, 26 black swan event, if you could call it a black swan, but that's for certain companies, right? As opposed to that's where the industry transformation is going to come from.
And one of the projects I worked on this year was a white paper for Elementor, and from the planner's perspective, platforms are starting to get so ubiquitous in terms of the products that are sitting on there that it becomes a lot more of a technology play. And so some of the planners I was speaking to were saying, we've actually sorted out our SOAs. They're now short, they're now quick, they're now efficient to provide and create. The problem we've got is we now have to fill out 180 pages manually of application forms. And so to implement the strategy for the client, to implement the products for the client, and then there is days and days worth of consolidating data back to get a holistic view of the client and sort out the fee consolidation that comes off the back of that. Platforms that start to win as integrated technology rather than competing on investment options, which are becoming more and more ubiquitous and the same for everyone, are ultimately going to win in this space. So, and to your point, AI as a tool that gives planners a better perspective of what their clients are doing and how they're doing it and what the right solutions might be for their particular clients are just going to become more and more important in this space.
And you probably the whole now that I think about it, like maybe someone like a Dash, right? Like in terms of that's probably something that they, when they put both of their businesses together with Raw and Wealth02, not foreseeing the impact that AI could have at that time. Everyone was there going, platforms and CRMs are very different. Obviously, Iris divesting OneView and what have you, and sort of two very different roles. Maybe that's going to change, and I think maybe platforms are going, okay, we need to play a role in that whole SOA space. If it does become a lot more commoditised, and if we don't want them living in two worlds. We don't want our advisors living in an X-Plan instance and a net wealth instance, right? So if an X-Plan instance can become commoditized, that's something that, as a technology company, which the platforms are no doubt probably thinking, okay, maybe there's where we can sort of retain some of our advisors.
Well, that's it, and the article we published 2 weeks ago around the quality of advice review announcements, and the little bit more certainty we have around what advice documents may look like. There's a blank canvas that advice providers can start to think about and start to use about how they're actually going to deliver the best advice experience and the best documentation of their advice for their clients, which won't be wedded to A4 pieces of paper. It won't be wedded to goals, objectives, strategy, products, fee disclosures, replacement product disclosure the way it has been for the past 25 years since FSR came in. You can do all sorts of weird and wacky and interesting things in that space, which are actually going to help clients better understand the advice that's being provided.
Yeah, so I think a couple of advisors are experimenting with it here. I'm sure it's already in train, but that I know of is, and I know you're aware of this, Ben, but these conversations, right, with a client like we're having today, transcribing that's pretty easy. We've all got transcription AI services now probably embedded, or if you haven't, you should. When you're interviewing your clients or having a conversation, we do it obviously with our vendors so we don't miss anything. But in terms of having these conversations via Zoom, or even if you're in person, making sure that you've got a phone or a video or some sort of audio device that then picks up the yes or no, which then you've got your signature, basically your verbal signature on anything, and you're sort of flicking through a couple of pages on your video that sort of says, this is what we're going to implement for you. Here's the tool that I've used, and here's the scenarios X, Y, Z. Are you happy to proceed? And then transcribing that into a really simple SOA. That's already that exists. So. And then having that data that's then mapped into a full CRM or a full basically an authority to proceed into a platform on the transaction. That's not hard to do, to standardise that data and then get it shifted into a platform or a CRM. So it's going to change things significantly in that respect.
Absolutely, and I think the message for advisors out there and licensees who are supporting them is, don't be wedded to what we've done for 25 years. Have a look at where the Corporation Act ends up and think about it like you're in 2025, and build your process like you're in 2025, and you can make it a lot better than what it has been for the past 25 years. The other big thing that obviously came out around quality advice review and delivering better financial outcomes is obviously around the NCAs. I've forgotten the C. What's the non NCAs? New class of advisor. That's the word I'm looking for. Non-qualified, as we used to be calling them, but new class of advisor. We're having a number of conversations around general advice as well, and how that plays in better to the advice funnel that consumers are on. What are you thinking about in that kind of space?
I know there's a lot of concern out there, and I appreciate concern. When I say concern, I'm talking about the advisors who have gone through hell and back for the last 10 years, right? So where we've implemented, and we don't need to repeat every sort of bit of legislation that's come out, and what they're doing now, and why it's so hard to run an advice practice. But obviously I think have we wound back the clock to the 1990s and the 2000s? I don't. I think it's semi-misplaced, the concern, for several reasons. It will come down to terminology in some respects, the enshrining of financial advisor. But I've always thought, the financial advisor is that specialist, right? So that role's always going to be needed. And at least for the next 2, 3, 4 years, what does the NCA look like in the world of, say, an industry fund or even a life insurer? And how do they actually, make it so it's beneficial? Is another concern. So with retiring clients, your needs are going to be so much different if you've got $50,000 in your industry fund, or even $100,000 in the industry fund, as opposed to $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 in terms of lifestyle requirements, medical sort of requirements, all of these sorts of things. And the moment you start to go into those areas that are considered PA, that's where the financial advisor is going to come into play. So I think, if anything, I actually like to think I always say this, maybe I'm too optimistic, right, Ben? A rising tide floats all boats, but I'm always on the half glass full side of things as opposed to the half glass empty. I think it's a generational thing as well. I know my mum comes to things from the half glass empty side of things. World's going to end and this is crap and blah-de-da-de-da. And, I shouldn't say that because my mum may be listening. But I'm the half glass full sort of guy. And if, we can elevate advice from even within the industry funds, start to promote it, even within, say, dare I say it, the banks and all of those areas who come into it. I also want to say around the industry funds. The industry funds you talk about vertical integration. And yes, I get it. I get the point around vertical integration. But unlike retail banks, unlike the banks who are for profit and for shareholder and looking to understand how do we basically make money, the industry funds have a different modus operandi, right? It's for member, it's for societal benefit. They have different APRA regulations, different requirements in that respect, different levels of duty and fiduciary responsibility to their members and to society than, say, what a bank does. So from that perspective, I'd like to think it's going to be different. And the second one around NCAs is commercially, I think it will actually end up benefiting financial advisors, because the industry funds, partners, even the GA space, they will start to look for more EFA relationships because they can't offer the complexity that they can currently over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And they're not in the realm, and they don't have the historical capability or the current capability to suddenly grow out these massive sort of PA advice networks, and they're going to have to do that through an EFA space. And the NCAs are good. Sorry, I'd close. One comment now, and I know this is where you want to get to a bit on the NCAs and the GA space. It provides all of a sudden a great fertile ground for people to start getting into advice, either if you're already sort of sitting there in an admin role within a fund or within a licensee or something, to go, okay, now there's a pathway to actually become an advisor, regardless, and I can start to think about and talk to and gain the experience and talk to clients, la-di-da-di-da, right? So I think it starts to go some way to fill that financial advice gap, but also hopefully, and I'm a little bit more reticent on, does it actually solve the whole big accessibility to advice? We'll see, but I think concern from the advisors is probably a little misplaced. If anything, I'd say it's going to be a bit of a boon for them. I'm going to get thrown under the coals for that, but anyway.
No, and
Look, there's no denying the challenges and to a large extent the pain that advisors have been through the last 10, 15 years. I mean that is a reality. But if you look for those who are more focused on today and to your point, more glass half full, they're all saying they've never been busier, they've never had better clients, they've never had they've never had it better than what they do at the moment. On the other hand, if you're a consumer who's got a simple question about how to make the right decision around their financial product, at the moment what happens is you ring your product, they say, I can't tell you what to do, that's advice, you need to go speak to a financial planner. Financial planner says, sure, I can give you that answer, but I'm going to have to charge you $6,000 to do it, and it's going to take 24 hours worth of cumulative time for me to go through your goals and objectives and financial position, come up with a strategy, make a recommendation, and the person goes, I just want to know whether or not I should switch, or I just want to know whether or not I should take my money out of here or there, or I just want to know if there's a different option available to me because I'm not sleeping at night with this, news of interest rates going down and recessions and things. And so those consumers get turned off financial advice. They get turned off their financial products because they can't have those questions answered. And having somebody there who can quickly, efficiently answer that question for them. But then when the person goes, actually, I now have 2 or 3 issues, or I now have a bigger problem, they'll be more open and more willing to go and see a financial advisor and get holistic advice for them. And then I think that second point, that other point you made around the other point you made around training and experience is PY becomes so much easier if you've spent a couple of years providing advice around particular products and had the experience of actually talking to someone and understanding their goals and objectives, understanding what they want, and giving them the right recommendations.
Yeah, I think that whole, given the fact that the government's also said licensees and basically have got the ability to hire NCAs and what have you, and the GA space hasn't changed. I think from that perspective, and the scale, with alongside scaled advice obviously being an option too, to your point, where you can suddenly just charge $400 or $300 for an hour of your time versus having to go down the SOA route, and also the removal of SOAs. Obviously, as a cottage-based industry that we exist in at the moment, is how do you incorporate NCAs or GAs if that's a strategic decision you make, whether you partner with someone, whether you basically trial it with PY students, right, in terms of bringing them in and saying, okay, well, at least I can now get this person in front of an advisor, in front of a client, and I can charge $200-300 an hour, as opposed to them being what many may see as a bit of a time suck or a cost to the business, where we go, well, are they going to stick around or not? Like all small businesses, you've got to invest in staff and just hope that they bloody stay with you. But I think that's a challenge. If anything, that's now easier for the industry to navigate through, and hopefully that one bit of advice then leads to a relationship to go, wow, hang on, they actually really helped. Then they'll get another bit of maybe one-off advice. Then the next bit will go, shit, I actually need help with a holistic plan here, because there's other elements I haven't thought about. So
yep. All right, so
that's as I said.
Yeah, totally. So I think those are probably the big ticket items that are on everybody's mind at the moment. But when you look back and reflect on 2024, what are the big themes? What are the big things that have stood out to you over the year? What do we see out of landscape?
What do we see out of landscape is I'm going to get into a little bit of going to get into product, only because I've been living in the product world for a little bit, is obviously there's been that continual shift from passive into active. From active into passive. That's got some way to play out. For those that do like to understand a little bit more about that space as opposed to practice management and what does advisors mean, there's always going to be the role of active asset managers because they actually help create the market. Otherwise, without the market for active asset managers, you're not going to have the passive side, right? So, but and you see that with the new active managers coming in all the time. I think there's more active managers now than there ever have been, despite the fact that there has been move into passive. And yes, there has been some closure of some big active managers. So it's going to be those really strong boutique active managers, which will give. And sorry, I'm going down the product side, Ben, but thought this might be worthwhile saying for some of the people that are on the call is, I think asset management's going to get significantly disrupted by AI itself, especially on the research side, especially around which, understanding how do we choose different types of stocks within our portfolio. And the part of the reason why I talk about product, and I don't want to say that it's the same, but with the growth of separately managed accounts, with $1 in every $2 now going into SMAs and 50% of practices using SMAs, that's going to have a disruptive play. But SMAs themselves are sort of active management portfolios. So I think what we're going to see is, and I'm going to say this delicately without pissing off a lot of the asset manager clients or even active managers, and even advisors. We live in this Lake Wobegon type world and in financial services. And what does that mean?
Yeah, what does
For
that
those
mean?
that don't know, I always like to use this. Lake Wobegon is like basically a fictional sort of lake that was created where, the women are the most powerful, the men are the most smartest. Basically it's the inherent sort of understanding that we're better than what we think we are. It's an ego thing. There's an inherent, I think, this industry has, by virtue of the sort of alpha type personality that resides within it, like advisors generally, they need to confront clients, and active managers need to be able to sell and, that sort of stuff. So there's an inherent, my product is better than your product. And, we're semi-blinded to that. So, and where am I going with that comment is there's going to be that, I think that element of growth in SMAs continuing because the active asset managers are performing, and it still plays into that element of I can outperform the market, and on my SMA is better than someone else's SMA. So that will continue to grow. What we need to be careful of in 2025, and I know we're already working on this, so this might sound a little bit self-serving, is how do you standardise that behaviour? How do you start to go through and standardise SMA? How do you start SMAs generally? How do you start to standardise the construction of SMAs to make sure they're still got a fiduciary sort of responsibility to the end investor? So that's what was playing out in 24. I think you're going to start to see a general, we need to make sure that industry is not earning the ire of, say, an ASIC. The other interesting outcomes is obviously with SMAs and technology is continued profitability at the practice level. So in that, we're seeing that, and even in the last couple of months, as I was sitting down with advisors, I've made it a passion or a mission of mine to sit down with as many practices and advisors as possible to understand what they're doing within their practices, and then helping others to convey that, and also where do they sit from a profitability point of view. And you were saying this before, that Profitability's never been higher. So if people are struggling with profitability, or if people are struggling with, how to actually manage this new world of efficiency, technology, and how do we implement it, reach out. Hopefully we'll be able to have a lot of that in our landscape. Now, I don't want to have 600 phone calls from advisors, but hopefully we can play some role as to what does best practice look like.
Well, and I think to a large extent,
That's what I'd say there.
yeah. I mean, we've done a series of articles over the last. We've done a series of
Yeah.
articles over the last 10 to 12 weeks where we've tried to focus on what those best practices actually are and what they look like. And if anyone's looking for what the good practices are doing and what they can be thinking about in their own practices, then there's a playbook that's starting to form out of there. The other two, I because you're in product space, I think the other two things that have stood out to me this year, in particular, is number one. I think this year we are close to, if not at, a increase in the number of financial advisors. I put a post up last week around the fact that when you look at the current number of advisors plus the ones that have just passed the financial advisor exam as new entrants, we should actually grow by around 100, which is the first year since December 2018 or early 2019 that we'll actually see a positive growth in advisors. And the second one is obviously around licensing. We've had a lot of planners leave larger licensees, bigger licensees, and set up their own practices. We're starting to see a little bit of consolidation happening in that space, and there's been a little bit of slowdown in the number of advisors switching licensees. And I think, there's an opportunity over 2025 for some consolidation to start happening in that kind of space. So those are the two big trends, I think, in advice that we're seeing leading up to whatever's actually coming through in the quality of advice review.
Yeah, I think the FAAA, your former employer, is actually pushing the case for co-licensing or dual licensing in some respect, I believe. I think that's, to me, that's a bit of a no-brainer. I think that was something that is going to happen. I think the larger licensees are probably aware of that and are really becoming more most of them now set up like dealer service arrangements, where they're providing services at scale. I think that's really where those bigger organisations are heading, without the sort of struggle of having a sort of dual a licensing approach where they're wearing all the risk for hundreds of advisors. And how does that work out? How does that play out over the next few years from a PI perspective? And I think generally, going down to that sort of individual PI sort of element is going to be something that becomes more and more pronounced. And obviously data is heading there. I don't think recently getting more of that information out into ASIC, I think there'll be probably some pushback there, but we'll see how that sort of plays out. The other area that you mentioned around the growth will come, and I think growth will come naturally. I think financial advisory. We both work closely with a business called Strive, right, Ben? And we go to these forums, and there's hundreds and hundreds of students looking at financial advice, and but there does need to be something around. And correct me if I'm sort of misplaced here in my thinking, but whilst the funnel is going to be filled on a GA and an NCA point of view, and the funnel might be filled from a PY perspective, but maybe not a PY perspective, but yes, we're growing, but there's still that restriction as to. And we're speaking with I'm not sure if Ketty Waller. I know you signed up to this. Ketty obviously made mention of the fact that certain universities have sort of started to think about, well, financial planning it's a little bit too difficult because there's so many restrictions to become a full financial advisor. So I think there's still work to be done there because we actually haven't revisited. So once FASIA disintegrated, there's still work to be done on what that is actually is the minimum requirement from a degree perspective and what is actually so the degree qualification element. So you don't want to start filling the funnel and then the funnel becomes massively small because no one can get through that funnel.
Yeah.
And suddenly you've got all these people offering GA and NCA and all of that sort of stuff without a really sort of easier pathway. But yeah, we'll see how that one plays out. That's where you and I can get down and bash a few heads in Canberra to make it easier.
Yeah. I mean, just getting back to your point around co-regulation, I could go on a massive rant around why we're already there, but the technology being used by the regulator isn't where it needs to be, and therefore we've still got this weird thing where you're personally responsible for the advice, but your licensee has to register you on the FAR as a financial advisor. But anyway, I won't go there. 2025. So we've got Quality Advice Review, DBFO coming through. We're going to see changes in terms of advice documentation, best interest duty changes. We may start to see a review of the Code of Ethics next year. There's obviously an election coming up. What other things are you seeing for next year?
So I don't know if we're in agreement on this one, but I think DBFO2 will happen fast, happen quickly, and it'll get waved through before the election. So wherever the election is, you speak to certain people, it's March or the latest May. But I think that you will we'll come out with legislation, what it looks like in Jan or Feb, and they'll want to try and wave it through ASAP. Maybe it will be fast, Ben. Yeah, they have been known to do it. Look at the social media laws. So they can do that. I don't think the Libs, frankly, and maybe, making sure I'm not speaking out of school, but I don't think the Libs will hold this one up. I don't think they want to deal with financial advice if they get in the new term. And this is something that will be pushed through. And so it's adapting, but I actually think even if it gets pushed through, it'll take a while for business to catch up. It'll take a while for funds. It'll take a while for practices, licensees, and all to understand what it really means. So whilst it gets pushed through, it's in terms of implementation, it's going to take some time.
Well, you just have to think back to FOFA. You just have to think back to FOFA. Yeah, just have to think back to FOFA, and there was an 18-month transition period, and then they got pushed out for another 12 months, and so you can see a 24, 30-odd month transition period. Plus, there's a way to do it with shell legislation, and you leave the regulations to come after the election for whoever's in charge at that point to fill in more of the details. So there's definitely ways to do it quickly if they have the mind to do it.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll leave that timing more up to you. I know you're pretty vocal on LinkedIn about timings and timeframes and how long it takes to actually enact things and those sorts of things. But yeah, in terms of pushing something through, I think it'll be pushed through fairly quickly. The other thing is with that, and I'm hopeful around obviously the SOA side of things, partly because being an organisation that's sort of seeing the impact that it's already having with some advisors who are, to your point, not restricted because they're running their own licence with the current confines of an SOA. With that sort of basically removed, the element of that, the surge in sort of, I guess, the larger licensees adopting things and being a little bit more comfortable around risk, and start to play with these things will actually have a huge impact for practices and advisors' profitability. So from my perspective, that I think the technology and the efficiency side will actually be the big focus point for a lot of practices and for a lot of technology companies. And just speaking from our perspective, i.e. Advisor Ratings, Product Recs, the things that we've been working on in the last 3 months are fairly significant, like the change that we're going through in terms of what technology and the whole AI things, especially with the implementation of things like Sonnet 3.5 and that's with Claude and with the OpenAI and even I think 2 days ago Google with Gemini coming out with more of its use cases. That's just going to accelerate. It's too hard keeping up with all the changes, but we try and make a good job of it, don't we, Ben? We've got a whole artificial intelligence channel that we go through with every LLM and what they're doing in every sort of space, whether it's agentic AI or whether it's conversational AI or whatever, having multimodal AI, and obviously having how can that impact certain use cases within the industry. So, and I'm sure we're not the only ones that are thinking about this day in, day out. So that's going to be pretty transformative over the next 12 months.
No, some of those Gemini 2.0 videos that are out there that it's helping you with strategy in games is mind-blowing. But to that point, I used Gemini 1.5 for a massive amount of text analysis on Tuesday last week, and then on Wednesday it came out with the next model, and the improvement between 1.5 and 2 were just different worlds of insight and speed and adaptability. So lot going on in that space. Anything else for 2025 you want to quickly mention?
25. No, I just want to close off with like bookend maybe the conversation in terms of what we talked about at the start with Bain. I know that's sort of a lot of people go, yeah, it's insignia and all of those sorts of things, but that space it just should be a way for advisors to think that they're in a really good industry that's sort of and the technology and all the sort of vendors in this space. Well, it's a $4 trillion industry now when you just look at superannuation alone. So lots to do if you've got a commercial, entrepreneurial, small business practice brain with the whole generational wealth transfer that's coming out. It's pretty exciting, and I'm glad 10 years ago, well, it's now coming to, I'm glad 10 years ago I made the decision to get into financial planning and advice and sort of this space. So I don't know if there's any other industry that's going through such change. So
no, I'm just glad to hear you just use the word planning. No, and to that point, just on that point around some of the cool stuff that's happening, I'd encourage everyone to have a look at the finalists from the FAAA Awards and the IFA Awards this year. The practices that put themselves up are doing some extraordinary things in terms of innovation of their advice process and the benefits that their clients get from that innovation. And the uplift in the number of clients that they can actually service because of that innovation are extraordinary. And again, I think, the opportunity with DBFO to have a look at those businesses, have a look at the way that they're building their practices and building their services and doing things differently can give you insights into what's actually possible, not just in today's world, but preparing for these regulatory changes. And I think, I was talking to some newer entrants and some old heads just over the weekend, and we were lamenting the fact that there's almost we as a profession, we don't feel like we're worthy, or we don't think we're actually doing things as well as we actually are, but we're actually doing a really good job, and we should be talking about the good job we're doing, and we should be learning from each other and sharing with each other everything that's going on, and not seen as, I'm trying to promote myself and what I'm doing. It's actually for the good of the profession and the good of everybody else. You see doctors sharing their knowledge, you see lawyers sharing their knowledge, you see accountants sharing their knowledge. The actuaries, if you ever have a look at the Actuaries Association, the thought leadership that comes out of that profession is extraordinary. We should be doing the same because there's more than enough clients for everyone. So those are some of the stories I hope to bring to everyone next year.
Yeah, and can I just add, can I close? I'm being kicked out of my meeting room because we're over this LinkedIn Live, but can I just add, on that note, we are still perceived by Canberra and the regulators as being a bit too disjointed. And it is frustrating, and I know every time we do, they're on LinkedIn just as much as we are, so, or in forums and reading things and sort of, throwing their heads around. And I appreciate the frustration of a decade of challenge and change, and God knows, the problems that have happened, and being at the coalface, I've witnessed it a lot, and the mental health issues, right? But if we keep sort of focusing on the past, it'll just create more negative connotations within the public, create more negative connotations with with Canberra about how difficult we are as an industry to deal with. Now, I was speaking with, not without dropping names, but you speak with Luke Howarth and all of those sorts of things who, even Stephen Jones getting to being more, quite positive about the space that we're in. I'm super positive around even the life insurance sector now, partly because I'm now deeply involved in it. But you see the MLC Life and the Resolution Life sort of come together. The Japanese do have, as we know, have long time frames, so they're very, very, very patient capital. But starting to see some of the noise around the life insurance space and what's been happening there around things like comms and getting people, life insurers were originally the ones that started off the financial advice industry, I should say life risk advisors, and the need, I know we've always been an underinsured nation, right? We always, despite the fact when we had direct and all of those sorts of things, Australians have always had that, we'll be right sort of attitude, and I don't think that'll necessarily change, but we do need to get more people insured some way. And I think that's another sort of big thing, Ben, that'll come out over the next couple of years is what does risk advice look like, and what is risk advice, how is risk advice remunerated, and also how is risk advice and the super funds from a personal perspective, not just group, what does that look like? I think that's a really interesting area that'll play out over the next 2-3 years. Maybe these super hubs of GA risk advisors. So anyway, I think there is some positives to be coming out. If you're getting risk advice, that naturally leads then into holistic advice.
Yeah,
I could talk forever, and
we could talk
probably
forever.
need to wind it up. I don't know who's actually listening to us at this point. I can't see anything, and whether we're actually interesting or not. So.
No, I can't tell either. So this is probably several articles, to be honest, but I'll see what I can do. I'm going to summarize all of this into an article. We'll put the video up for those who missed it and decide that they want to catch up on this. But otherwise, we'll try and do this a bit more regularly next year and sort out the links if they weren't working
thumbs up
properly.
or thumbs down if we hit the nail on the head or not. I don't know.
Yeah. That was good.
I think a thumbs up.
If you want more advice talk or more product talk, let us know. More on AI. There's certainly plenty we'd love to talk about on that. But have a good Christmas. Have a good New Year's. Yeah. Have a good Christmas. Have a good New Year's. Have a good break, everyone. 2025 opportunities are going to be ginormous, and we look forward to bringing you some stories and insights and thoughts on how you can be doing all of that better. But have a great end of year, and we'll see you next year. Thanks, Angus.
See you, everyone. Cheers, mate. Bye.